How did the New York Giants get Daniel Jones to play at such a high level? We're going to find out from Tyler Dunne of GoLong, who did an in-depth story on the very topic. That's coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise? Then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, that's in all caps, by the way, in the game. Hello, New York Giant fans. Welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina. Happy to have you with us on this Wednesday. It is hump day. It is the start of the new work week for the New York Giants. And I'm pleased to have a guest in on the podcast. He is Tyler Dunne, who is the founder, publisher, lead writer of GoLong, writes some excellent long-form stories that really dive into behind the scenes stuff around the league. And he's got an interesting story out this week, or actually it came out last week, about the New York Giants and Daniel Jones. And we're going to talk to Tyler about that, as well as some other stuff that he's done. So Tyler, first off, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I believe this is your second time coming back with me. So I do appreciate you taking the time to come back.
Hey, the pleasure is all here, Patricia. It's great to see you, hear you. Congrats on all the success with the pod. And yeah, I feel like there's a little more hope in the air this time around, right? Like we did this last year and the franchise was in a very depressive state, and you know the pitchforks were out, rightfully so. I'm glad that they were out, that there were changes made. So hey, they're going to the playoffs. Things have changed a bit.
You know, pinch me here. I'm still like, am I dreaming? I'm still pinching myself.
Same here. It blows my mind.
I did not expect this, but listen, I'll take it. After almost a decade, you know, we had the one outlier in 2016, but basically over a decade of football that just wasn't very good. I mean, this time of year, I was up to stuff on the draft. I was up to stuff on free agency. I haven't done any of that because I am so into, you know, what lies ahead. Even if the Giants go one and done. But anyway, you know, you mentioned, you know, this time last year we were talking, you had put out an article basically dissecting what went wrong with the Giants that led to the changes and whatnot. And, you know, just spinning forward, and I want to talk about one of the big changes. One of the big changes, of course, being the coaching staff that this team brought in: Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka, you know, Wink Martindale, and so on and so forth. When they were hired, you know, the big question I think at the time was, what do we do with Daniel Jones? Daniel Jones was coming off of 3 years that were not very good, very inconsistent, but Daniel Jones was I think a product of different coaching staffs, obviously different systems, just poor talent around him. This year, Brian Daboll has come in and he's basically worked his magic with this quarterback. Let's start off with what you see as the biggest differences in Daniel Jones this year versus in years past.
It's the Brian Daboll effect, right? I mean, this is a coach who checks every box you could ever want a coach to check. I mean, yeah, there's the in-game management's there. I mean, you see it. Right, he's got the brass balls to make the right call late in games where most coaches are terrified of their own shadow, and so he's got that. He can draw up a game plan as well as anybody. Right, he doesn't call the plays, but you can see the effect that he has on the game, play to play, drive to drive, all of that. So all the X's and O's stuff is there, and he's developed Josh Allen. I think probably he's as responsible for the development of Josh Allen as much as anybody. You know, Jordan Palmer in the offseason, but during the season, what Brian Daboll did was magnificent. I mean, we hadn't seen a jump like that in completion percentage and accuracy in this generation. I can't think of a parallel there. But I think what got me excited about this hire more than anything, it told me that John Mara and the Giants were serious about getting this franchise back on track more than anything is that Brian Daboll knows people. He gets people. He knows that this is a human game. It's not played, at a mathematical equation. That stuff matters, but I think too many coaches get wrapped up in all that stuff. And even some of the best play callers get wrapped up into all that stuff. He knows that this is a violent game that's played by violent people. You've got to connect on a personal level with every single player 1 through 53. I do a show at GoLong with Isaiah McKenzie, a slot receiver who, frankly, when Brian Daboll was the OC in Buffalo, wasn't used a heck of a lot. He was kind of a decoy a lot, jet sweeping around. He wanted the ball more. I know he wanted the ball more, but when you mention Brian Daboll's name, the play caller, the offensive coordinator, the one responsible for his role, Isaiah McKenzie just sounds like he wants to run through a wall for this guy. So if that's the kind of player that loves Brian Daboll, you can just tell everybody's going to love this guy. I'm sure we'll get into it with the quarterback, but anything New York Giants that comes to mind. I can remember his first press conference. I mean, you were there. I wasn't there. I'm out here in Western New York. I just remember stopping everything I was doing to pull up the live feed because I just wanted to see how he could command a room. What's that first message going to be? And I thought he just struck every note perfectly, that he's in charge, but it wasn't forced. It wasn't fraudulent. I think everybody, rightfully so, is probably off of Joe Judge and thinking, all right, well, the BS radar's up here. Like, let's see if he is going to be authentic and real. It was authentic. It was real. And he's backed it up in just every possible way in year one.
He definitely has. And I know my first impressions at that presser, he was very laid back, was joking around with people. I thought, okay, right off the bat, this guy is nice and loose, and he wasn't scripted or rehearsed or anything like that. He just took to the podium. I remembered him, he was modest, but at the same time, direct. There was no rah-rah speech per se. He was just, he was real, it's like, I walked away and, I know I've said this before with other head coaches saying that I was impressed with Joe Judge, but in retrospect, Joe Judge was too scripted a lot of times. Good football man, don't get me wrong, but just too scripted. And if things didn't go according to script, that's when things fell apart. With Daboll, you've seen some adversity happen, and instead of falling apart, what has he done? He's kind of brought the team together, held them together. And that's a big testament to, his coaching style. And as you mentioned, his personality, which, by the way, I'll tell you a real quick story before I ask the next question. I remember we were at training camp, not training camp. I'm sorry. It was during an OTA, and the media, we were given like a cutoff point where we can walk up to the field and view. And Daboll came over and he said, so, you guys have a good view? And we're like, well, we kind of like, that's where PR told us to stand. And he said, why don't you move up? And we're like, well, PR told us to stay here. And he says, come on, move up. So we got up closer, probably as close as we'd ever gotten to a practice. Yeah. And we were like, okay, this guy gets it, So really, I think a genuine and sincere guy, and a good football man too, as you mentioned, gutsy. And what, here's, let me ask you about this, because this took some guts, I thought, on his part. He hired a staff that what didn't consist of his buddies or people that he had worked with before. He just hired the best people together, and he's made it work. How much of that is, the personality versus the X's and O's, the shared goal? I mean, what do you attribute that to?
That's a really good point. And I think that's what makes him different as well. How many of these head coaches that take over instantly are just bringing in allies and yes men and, people that they've worked with? And I think we're almost preconditioned to expect it. Somebody's hired, it's like, all right, who do they work with? And that's how they're going to fill out their staff. And he didn't do that. Like, he got the best coaches that he could. And Wink Martindale, there's a perfect example. I mean, here's somebody that he faced, right? I mean, he faced off with him in the playoffs in 2020. And I was shocked that Wink Martindale was even available with, his intellect on the defensive side of the ball, but, all over the place. I think that this is somebody that is going to think outside of the box and to kind of go from granular to big picture. That's what the Giants had to do, right? I mean, for the longest time, this was an ownership group that just kind of wanted to keep the hamster wheel turning with familiar faces, with allies, with somebody from a protected class of people that is probably going to tell ownership what they want to hear and vice versa, and nothing's going to get done. And you mentioned this team making the playoffs one time in the last decade. That's how it happens. They're not alone. A lot of teams do this. A lot of owners make the same mistakes. It's, they were very close. I mean, you may know better than me, but holy heck, 3-4 weeks to go, the leaks started coming out. Kevin Abrams, going to be promoted internally or is a leading candidate for the GM opening once Dave Gettleman retires and is given a hero's exit, which was very odd to say the least in that final game. And then Joe Judge sure sounded like he was going to be back and empowered. So they were ready to just kind of make the same mistakes that they've made in the past. And thank God for the New York Giants that the wheels came off like they did with the 3rd and 9 quarterback sneak and the fan appreciation sodas and the go right down the list of the embarrassments, the golf clubs, all of that. And it had to be just a tire fire to epic proportions for them to have no choice but to think outside of the box and get independent thinkers in this game. And they got a good one in Joe Shane. They got a great one in Brian Daboll. And I'm sure we'll go to Daniel Jones here next. They were in a weird, tough spot, right? To come in, they could have hit reset and just, thrown anybody out there at quarterback and tanked gracefully to try to get a high pick. Teams go that route. But I think that they really took a step back, analyzed Daniel Jones's game. They saw what he did well. They saw what he didn't do so well. They know Brian Daboll is a teacher of the position. They could accentuate the positives, hide the negatives, and just see what happens. You're right. They didn't pick up his option. It's not like they, quadrupled down on him as the long-term savior. It was a 1-year trial run, and they brought in a Tyrod Taylor. They challenged him in training camp, and now they're in a position where, I think everybody would have to agree this is a quarterback that you want around in 2023. Maybe you find a 3-year deal, a 4-year deal. You find a number that works. I think that both parties involved are going to see this through beyond the season.
Hey, Giant fans, have you ever wanted to show the NFL GMs how it's really done? Well, now you can by hooking up with Ultimate Football GM, where you have the final say over every aspect of your roster. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go, as you want, and when you want. We at the Locked On NFL Network are already competing against each other, and we're having a blast. We know you will as well when you compete against your friends. So go ahead and get started. Locked On Giants podcast listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, which is in all caps, in the game store. To download the game, visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. And that promo code, again, in all caps, is Locked On. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Hey, Giant fans, thanks for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you local insights that you love to the national spotlight with daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's get to Daniel Jones now, because I want to get to something you wrote in your article that really caught my eye. And you wrote, and I apologize if I'm spoiling it, but people do check out the article. It's on GoLong.com. Kyle, tell us about it, after this as we get to the end of the show. But you wrote that Brian Daboll challenged Jones by making him uncomfortable and making Tyrod Taylor comfortable. How much can you go into to explain, to kind of give us a little bit more of a picture on that?
I'm not there day to day, so you probably have notebooks full of 7-on-7s and 11-on-11s and completions, and I imagine it wasn't that pretty for Daniel Jones. I remember seeing the tweets trickling out, which is always dangerous, to kind of draw conclusions based off a godforsaken website that is Twitter. But it wasn't pretty at camp, and what I was told from somebody close to the head coach is exactly that at training camp he knew he needed to test Daniel Jones's, mental toughness in that market. That's unlike a lot of markets, right? Every single day, there's going to be a lot of cameras in there, a lot of reporters in there. The back page of the newspaper, it's you might be up here or you might be down there, and you need a quarterback who's going to stay in the middle, laser beam kind of mentality. So Brian Daboll really wanted to test Daniel Jones in that regard, like see if he can handle it mentally. So yeah, plays were scripted in a way to set Daniel Jones up for failure. Wink Martindale was told, all right, here's offensively what's going to happen. And Brian Daboll told him, stop it, right? Call a play that's going to stop him. And then the inverse was also true for Tyrod Taylor. So, he wanted QB2 to look good, QB1 to look bad, or at least set up for failure. And then you'll see how Daniel Jones performs under those circumstances. But I think more importantly, he wanted to see mentally how he would react to adversity, because it's hard to manufacture adversity in training camps today. I mean, OTAs and minicamp are just kind of glorified walkthroughs, and you're installing an offense and nothing's really full speed. Even training camp, it's good for the players. I mean, there's not a lot of contact, not a lot of hitting, at least compared to, back in the 90s and early 2000s. So, preseason, you're just trying to get through it alive. It's hard to kind of condition the body for a regular season, but also condition the mind for the regular season and the adversity a quarterback's going to face. So I think that was kind of a creative way by Brian Daboll to see if this guy can handle it. And once he handled it and didn't even flinch, didn't bat an eye, didn't ask what the hell was going on, Brian Daboll fell in love with Daniel Jones, and he was all in. And then obviously they get into the season, they start 6-1, and things kind of take off.
Now, just to back up a little bit, Daboll was telling us today, as a matter of fact, today being on Monday, that when he came in, he worked with different players, obviously, to get to know them, to build up a trust, a relationship. And one of the things he did with Daniel Jones is basically he had 3 different playbooks, I guess the 3 playbooks of his tenure with the Giants. And they went through it and they said, okay, what did you like? What don't you like? And they took elements from that, incorporated it into what Daboll and Mike Kafka were developing. And then they went out to practice and they said to Daniel, don't worry about making a mistake. Just do what you would normally do. And this is what practice is for. And we'll kind of work from there. And that seemed to work for Daniel. So, to your point about how they tested him by trying to make him uncomfortable, but at the same time, they kind of took the ties off, if you will, and said, hey, don't worry about a mistake. Whereas I think in the previous regime, it was don't make a mistake. And Daniel was playing kind of tight. I mean, do you see in Daniel, he's a little bit more at ease, more relaxed, more decisive than he's been in the past?
Yeah, it sure seems like it. I think, with Daniel Jones, the criticism is fair. And I try to really look at both sides of the equation here when it comes to Daniel Jones with this story that we have up at golongtd.com. And, there are scouts and one longtime NFC exec that I know well. I think he made a really good point. Like when it comes to Daniel Jones, he never really was this, star in high school. I mean, he was okay. He was pretty good. Princeton wanted him. He walks on at Duke. He gets to Duke. He's bleh for 2 years, has a pretty good final year. And then obviously Dave Gettleman falls in quote unquote full blue glove at the Senior Bowl of all places. And he's a 6th overall pick. And then for the most part in the NFL, he's been up and down, but we haven't really seen those singular moments of just greatness that, some of these quarterbacks that don't look great early on, they at least had those moments in high school. Maybe they're down in Texas in some high pressure environments and you saw it there, or they played in the SEC or the Big Ten. And you kind of know, all right, Justin Fields, dude, he was in a bowl game. He took those shots against Clemson. He made the big time throws. It's in there somewhere. We can just pull it out of him at some point. I think that's the danger with Daniel Jones is there's never really been those moments. So that's where I'm also kind of skeptical of this. As Brian Daboll kind of maxed him out, is this as good as it possibly gets? Or does he have the mental toughness? Is this impressive because their wide receiver room, I mean, was basically evacuated. Somebody that was in the doghouse is now your number one. Somebody that was buried on the Bills depth chart is go-to guy all of a sudden. There's all these injuries. I think it's starting to look like the latter, that all these less than ideal circumstances, a bad offensive line that's competent, I guess, okay now, was awful before. It's not good for a quarterback, and yet here he is. You know, he has the Giants at 10 wins. They've made the playoffs. Brian Daboll trusts him and vice versa. They've got a good relationship. I feel like there's enough good that you'd want to see this through. You want to take it into another year and see if this partnership can continue to grow. I don't think it's going to stop the Giants from hunting for quarterbacks, nor should it. You always should be looking for quarterbacks, but I don't think they need to do anything drastic, right? They don't have to be Kyle Shanahan and mortgage 3 first-round picks for, you know, a Trey Lance who played 1 year of football at North Dakota State. You know, you don't have to do anything crazy. You're going to hand Deshaun Watson the most guaranteed money in NFL history. You're not going to do anything like that. Like, you can let this grow, see where this partnership goes, and I think that's a good thing, and that's good for Daniel Jones's growth. And you know, I think that Chris Sims and Kurt Warner and Rich Gannon, these quarterbacks I talked to that watch a ton of film for this story, they're all kind of in agreement that, look, he's not Patrick Mahomes, he's not Josh Allen, he's not Joe Burrow, but this is somebody that could be a top 10 quarterback with this coach in this offense. And you know what? In the meantime, as Chris Sims said, build an effing team. Go sign some guys, get them some help, and just see where it goes. Seems like a good place to start.
Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned the receivers and whatnot. One of the things that is a hallmark of a franchise quarterback is elevating the talent around you. And he has done that with basically this mishmash of receivers. And I asked Isaiah Hodgins after the Colts game, I said, what is it about Daniel that just has elevated all of your games? What is it about it? And he said, look, Daniel's a great leader, tireless work ethic, comes in, you know, just he sees things on tape that we don't, and we communicate. So he's an excellent communicator, and just the confidence has grown in him. And he, you know, Isaiah just talked about, you know, how the confidence is there. It almost reminded me what receivers used to say about Eli Manning. Now, I'm not saying Daniel Jones is Eli Manning, not even close, but just in the approach and the work ethic and how he's kind of brought out the best in teammates that, you know, quite honestly, would you have him on your fantasy football team at the start of the year if I told you they'd be an option? Probably not. So that he was very complimentary of that. And then, you know, the other thing with Daniel Jones we've got to talk about, and I raised this to Daboll, is the relationship with Saquon Barkley and how that's kind of helped him a lot. You know, when you look at that relationship, you know, we talk about duos, and usually we talk about bookends. They're from the same position and everything like that. Barkley, of course, plays a different position than Jones, but yet the two of them have complemented each other so well. Do you see that? And what do you think has been the biggest benefit there and the biggest compliment between those two?
Yeah, you can. And I think that's an extension of the offense too. Is, you know, early on in the season, I was kind of skeptical. I'm like, if you're starting to see these direct snaps to a running back this early in the year, is Daboll like just really trying to hide what he has at quarterback? Is it getting a little too gimmicky, a little too trickeration? What's going on here with the identity of this offense? But I think as the season kind of motored along, you did see an offense with a flow, a rhythm, which is remarkable given the lack of talent. I mean, just about every Sunday they go out there, at least on paper, with less talent than the team they're facing, yet they kind of grind through these games. They find a way to score when they have to score. And I don't think that it's necessarily just total coincidence that at the end of these games, they find a way to win. I know it's kind of hard to quantify in numbers, and we need that, like in media, like we need this number to justify what we see out there. I think that's back to that human element with Brian Daboll. He just gets his guys late in games and knows how to maximize the talent of every single player he has and just inject them with that belief that they're going to make that play. You know, what comes up so often, he said this himself at press conferences, he wants tough-minded players, guys that are going to rise up in that moment. You know, he tested Daniel Jones in training camp. He passed. I think it's the whole offense. I mean, he knew Isaiah Hodgins, in Buffalo. I mean, this is a tough-minded dude. This is somebody who was frustrated in Buffalo, wanted the ball, wanted opportunities, suffer some injuries, didn't get those opportunities, gets to the Giants and is taking full advantage. I think it's as mental as it is physical. But yeah, back to your question, I think at the right number, you want Saquon Barkley back. Is he going to be enticed by a Houston Texans team out there, or God, who knows what team that can just blow him away with money? Would he want to chase the money and take more elsewhere, which every player should maximize their value in this violent game that, puts your brain at risk down. I get it. But if you want to keep a good thing going, man, I'd be tempted to stay in New York for a little less to keep this thing going with Daniel Jones and Brian Daboll, because you're right. Whether it's the RPO stuff, out of the backfield stuff, just they've got something special between those two that if you can somehow add a bona fide number one receiver, if you find a tight end or keep developing, your rookie, and the line is going to get a lot better, there's reason for optimism. I don't know if they take a Jalen Hurts, Philadelphia Eagles sized leap, but you have to think that this thing is going to keep improving if you can keep those two together and then keep building around them.
Hey, small business owners, if you're looking for the right people to help your small business fire on all cylinders, check out LinkedIn Jobs. Post a free job listing in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job and the purple hiring hashtag frame to your LinkedIn profile to let everybody know that you're hiring. Over 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn Jobs every week and are just waiting to find opportunities with employers like your business. With LinkedIn Jobs, simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize whom you like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, so now I want to ask you, we talked about contracts. Let's talk about a potential contract for Daniel. The Giants, because they're in the playoffs, they're going to be drafting, I think at the highest they can go is 22 or 23. So they're not in a position to take a quarterback this year, at least not a blue chipper. The quarterback situation around the league, I think if you go team by team, you'll see a lot more teams need quarterbacks than don't need quarterbacks. That being said, there should be a market for Daniel Jones. So if you're the Giants, if you're Joe Shane, what do you do with him as far as a contract goes? Do you just make it incentive laden? Do you pay him, per average like a Allen or Mahomes, even though he doesn't have those credentials? What approach do you take?
Boy, I don't think you can go Allen, Mahomes, Burrow, Kyler Murray. This doesn't strike. I mean, I think Daniel Jones's camp has to realize that too. Like in terms of like the market going up, 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 he's not in that stratosphere. But you're right. There is a market. The demand is exponentially higher than the supply right now. So, I mean, like the Washington Commanders, right in the division, they might be able to blow him away with the contract. They may make him an offer he can't refuse. There's going to be teams out there with more money to spend than the New York Giants, but I do think they want to make him a priority. I do think they'll pay him a good amount of money. I'm no cap genius. I kind of rely on like the Michael Genettis of the world, and we're at Spot Track. He made a great point that if they do want to keep him, which I think they do, and the report came out that they do, like a 3-year deal, in the same vein as, it seems weird to use Blake Bortles' name, but he was off of taking the Jaguars to the AFC Championship game in 2017 into 2018 at the 11th hour. They struck a deal that I think it was like 3 years, 54 mil. So if you use that as a model with the cap going up to where it is in 2023, you're looking at like 3 years, 66 mil. That seems pretty reasonable, right? I mean, if Daniel Jones is willing to take 22, 23 a year, that still allows the Giants to go get him some weapons. And I would think that Daniel Jones would take a little less to stay and maybe get another contract after this one, because I mean, he's already been through hell. I mean, he's gotten his face kicked in, as Gannon said in our story, where, I mean, he's been through terrible head coaches, coordinators, offenses, injuries, the worst offensive line in football. You think that he would want some continuity with one of, if not the best offensive coach in the game. I think that accounts for something after everything he's been through. So we'll see. It's going to get interesting. But it just makes too much sense for them to stay together. I can't see him playing for another team.
Yeah, I'd be surprised too. And for a contract, I've kind of started dabbling a little bit in it because I do play with the salary cap. I could see him getting a very heavy incentive laden contract, kind of. Eli Manning got some incentives too, if I remember correctly. In 2007, he made an extra, I want to say, million or so. Maybe it was more, for every playoff game he won. So maybe you throw something like that into the pot and just say, hey, listen, and plus that helps your cap because that money hits the following year since it's an NTLBE. So yeah, I could definitely see that. But I think, and tell me if you disagree, that if the Giants are going to do something with Daniel, they're probably going to want to get it done before the start of free agency this year, which I believe starts on March 15th. Because otherwise, if you've got to franchise tag him, you're looking at, I think it's going to be about 32 mil. Whereas, ideally you want maybe that franchise tag for Saquon if you want to keep both of them. And it's a lot less to keep, the running back on the franchise tag than a quarterback. I mean, do you agree with that?
Totally agree. And you know what we're both kind of forgetting here is the season's still going. Like, I don't know. What if the Giants get Minnesota in the first round? Minnesota sure didn't look good against Green Bay. The Giants took them to the brink and really should have won that game. You beat Minnesota. Okay, you get to the divisional round. Anything can happen.
Sure.
San Francisco, I mean, Philly's kind of had their number. That'd be tough. But if they get on a run here, if they get to an NFC championship game or, I mean, holy hell, get to a Super Bowl.
Oh.
Eli Manning pulled off some crazy runs. I don't know. I know it sounds like I'm pandering to your audience, but anything can happen in this league. The future, the financial future of Daniel Jones is in Daniel Jones's hands. And the Giants would gladly give him a blank check or whatever he wants if he won a damn Super Bowl this season or took him to a conference title game. That's what's crazy is we can talk numbers and this and that, but it could still be, the difference could be much higher than anything we're thinking right now.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, it can get crazy. So final question, and I've got to play devil's advocate here. If the Giants don't bring back Daniel Jones for whatever reason, he gets a better offer. This lovey-dovey talk that we hear is just a front. Where do they go from here? I mean, they have Tyrod Taylor obviously under contract, but do you think not bringing back Daniel Jones would be a step backwards, or can they continue building with Tyrod Taylor, who's basically been a journeyman for most of his career?
I think so. I think that they would, whether it's Tyrod Taylor or another veteran that they just scramble to sign. I probably think more highly of Daboll than most, but I feel like he could win with Jacoby Brissett or anybody. He's that smart with his game plans and can maximize the talent of the quarterback and everybody around the quarterback. It would be less than ideal, but I feel like they'd find another veteran and they'd probably be a little bit more aggressive in the draft. And they come from Buffalo and they were both there for, the Josh Allen pick where, they had the extra first rounder to kind of matriculate their way up the draft board. Thanks to my podcast co-host, Jim Monis, by the way, who's now with the XFL and working with me. So that poor guy, I mean, he's one of the smartest football people I know. He should be running an NFL team. But him and Doug Whaley, I mean, they get this extra first, so the Bills have that next year. And they work their way up. They trade Cordy Glenn. They had to kind of work from the 20s up to number 7. And then you take Josh Allen instead of Josh Rosen, which Bills fans were not happy about in the moment. I don't know. The Giants, I don't really think they have the draft ammo. I don't think they have the assets. If they wanted to trade Saquon Barkley, they could have during the season. They didn't do that. It'd be a lot harder to work their way up into CJ Stroud territory, or I don't know. I haven't looked at the draft too much. that would be tough. So that's Daniel Jones's leverage here. You're right. I mean, Daniel Jones's camp could play hardball if they really want to and say, hey, what's your options? Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to go after a Brissett-like quarterback and kind of start anew, start over, start from scratch with another training camp, test of mental toughness with somebody else? I feel like the Giants could call that bluff and say, yeah, we've got a damn good head coach. We've got a culture here that changed. And then I think that Daniel Jones's camp thinks, okay, you're right. Let's find the right number. And then they just make it work. So I like the question, and I'm kind of rambling on and on here. I can't see Daniel Jones wanting to go somewhere. I feel like going to one of those teams where quarterbacks just kind of go to die is not a smart long-term move on his part. And there's a lot of those teams.
And of course, it would behoove him because, I mean, if you think about it, they threw out the first 3 years, started over in this new system, and he did well in year one of the system, but we haven't seen a lot of deep balls. We haven't seen a lot of the explosive type plays. I mean, they cut back a little bit on the pre-snap motion in the second half of the season. It would probably behoove Daniel, I would think, to return year two in the same system, further build up your quote unquote street cred, and take a shorter term deal, maybe a 2-3 year deal. And if you outplay the contract, rip it up and go for the real payday, because he'll still be young enough to get that, that big payday, assuming that he stays healthy.
Totally agree. I think that's probably what happens. And also if you give him that short-term deal and he turns into a pumpkin, right? And all these close wins turn out to be a mirage and you're not satisfied, or it's just kind of okay. The Giants can still be aggressive and keep hunting for a young quarterback. And I think that's where, the ownership did not want to start over a head coach, as you know. Like, they don't want to get into the business of firing head coaches. They want a guy in place that's the face of the team and just build and build and build and build. So I think that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll both have that benefit of the doubt that, hey, if for whatever reason this Daniel Jones stuff doesn't work out, they'll get another bite at the apple. They'll get their guy eventually, and they'll have that opportunity down the road. So that job security is nice to have if you're a head coach and a GM, to know, okay, let's see this through and we're confident, but if it doesn't work out, I'm not going to get fired. Because usually that's what happens is you make a big decision, it doesn't work out, see ya. I guess you give the Maras that, right? Like they almost hung on to Joe Judge, which would have been disastrous, but maybe they hang on to these guys, or at least they should.
So far, so good. No reason not to. I mean, what they've done, considering they had a bad salary cap, considering, the injury situation, which continues to be a problem for this team. I mean, Joe Schoen, I don't know if he's going to get executive of the year, but I think he's certainly worthy of consideration for it, given what the team has accomplished with the limitations that it's had. But, and as for Daboll, I know a couple times his name has come up for coach of the year. I personally think it goes to like a Nick Sirianni, or even if he gets into the playoffs, a Dan Campbell maybe even could get it. But Daboll, certainly, given what he's worked with, certainly deserves consideration. But overall, the Giants on the right path. Hopefully, like you said, it doesn't turn into a pumpkin, which is, we thought they were on the right path under Joe Judge on his first year, and then everything fell apart. So Giants got to be careful of that. I don't think it will, though. I think they've got the right guy in there, and the right staff and the right support system to maintain it.
I do too. I mean, they started where they had to, and that's in the building. And it was, the culture there was awful. And I think the older you get, you've covered the NFL a long time too. I mean, early on you hear culture and you kind of like, you roll your eyes and scoff at it. Like, oh, give me talent. Like, talent is what wins. And it does. But before you can start adding talent, I mean, you've got to get guys excited to go to work in the morning. And my God, I mean, the Minnesota Vikings under Mike Zimmer just dreaded waking up and going to work. He was such a miserable boss to work for. And if he was angry or ornery or pissed off about something, he just let it on everybody around him. And that affects everybody. And they changed that. They turned it around with Kevin O'Connell. And I think the Giants, and I don't know if Joe Judge was different than Zimmer, but similar in ways. Whether it was him, whether it's Dave Gettleman and the way he treated his own staff, it was bad. They had to start with the fumigation of the building before you could start, finding a 3 tech or a corner or considering the quarterback decision. They had to start from ground zero on building this thing up. They have in year one, and lo and behold, they've been winning some games too, which is just kind of the cherry on top.
Yep. And certainly Giant fans have had a lot to smile about. I know I've smiled because I always say it's easier to cover a winning team than it is a losing team. And I'm just so pumped up for the playoffs. I mean, I don't know how far they're going to go. I suspect maybe one and done, but it depends on who they draw. And of course, they've won 2 of their last 3. They probably should have won their last 3, that Vikings game, as you mentioned, but certainly brighter skies ahead for the Giants. At least that's what it looks like right now. And it's about time because it's, this rivals the old wilderness years decade, which started in the 60s, went through the 70s. I mean, I don't know if you remember the story, the 15 years of lousy football, with the plane and everything, the ticket burning and all that stuff. This last decade pretty much rivals that in a lot of ways. So
just no trips to a boat, right? You don't want that.
Yes, no boat trips. Exactly. We were just thinking about that. I was just talking about that with somebody, actually. I said, oh my gosh, right around now is when, because they had 2 days off. Well, they have 2 days off after the Colts game. And it's like, please don't let there be any boat trips.
They really should mock it, stage a picture in the weight room or something, in the jeans and the shirt, but have a different surrounding. It's for a full exorcism of that moment, just to complete that. They really should do something. Yeah.
That just blew my mind, because that just was just such a distraction. But hopefully this team's a little smarter than that. I think they are. But Ty, before we let you go, tell everybody about your site, your podcast, and the book you have that's out.
Thank you so much. Yeah, if everybody wants to read the full story on Daniel Jones, I think it's around 7,000 words, and we have a preview at the top that maybe people have already read on kind of how they handled him in training camp. But if you go to the story, Daniel Jones the future? There'll be a coupon right there for 25% off to subscribe to GoLongTD.com. And if you choose the annual rate, I'll also send you a signed copy of The Blood and Guts, How Tight Ends Save Football. So, and also I got to say, the number one hangout interview that I had for that book by far was probably Jeremy Shockey. Hanging with him down at Miami Beach, throwing a few drinks back as one does when you're with Jeremy Shockey, and hearing all his crazy ass stories from the U to the Giants to New Orleans. It was awesome. And I think you're going to learn a lot about Jeremy Shockey and the whole tight end position. Mike Pope was great, longtime Giants assistant. You could talk to him for hours. And obviously we got some Bavaro stuff in there. It was a lot of fun. I think Giant fans will enjoy it. So, hey, get 2-for-1 special there if you make your way over to Go Long TD.
All right. And of course, you also have the podcast over there, as you mentioned. So you're a busy man. You're all over the place. I love it.
And here at the beautiful Fairfield in Cincinnati. So here for a little Bengals Bills action. So yeah, always just try to cover the NFL through that long form lens, and dig a little deeper, do these profiles, these deep dives on teams. And yeah, the autopsy last year, that 3-parter was, I say it was fun in quotes. Maybe it wasn't fun to parse through the rubble, but
it was
sometimes that's needed.
It was very eye-opening. That's for sure.
I appreciate it. Yeah, but they fixed it, right? They must have read it, right? They finally got they thought outside of the building. So it didn't make the ownership very happy, I'm sure, but they took the right action.
It was needed, I mean, look, the old way wasn't working, and you go back and you say, Gettleman. Technically, you could say Gettleman was part of that George Young tree, and that George Young tree dried up a long time ago.
Yeah,
and it was just time, the game changed, and it was time to bring in, a modern duo, and they did that. So hopefully, like I said, better times ahead for the New York Giants. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. I want to thank Tyler Dunne of GoLong for coming on with me. Always good to see him and to hear about his latest work. Do check it out. He does a fantastic job. If you like long form stories that really get into the detail, Tyler's your man. And Also, make sure you keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast tomorrow. We'll have the crossover show. Gino Camilleri will join me from Locked On Eagles. We'll do Locked On Giants live. Bad Dog should be bouncing off the walls, if still bouncing off the walls after the Giants made the playoffs. So plenty of stuff coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast. For Tyler Dunne, I'm Patricia Traina. Everybody have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.